Do you know what the word orphan meant in 1854? It didn't mean what you think. In the records of the Children's Aid Society, the organization that shipped approximately 200,000 children west on trains between 1854 and 1929, a child could be classified as an orphan while both parents were still alive. All it took was a police arrest. Children as young as 5, picked up off the streets of Lower Manhattan, processed through the same city department that ran the asylums and the almshouses, and reclassified. The parents weren't dead. They were somewhere else in the system. Between 1845 and 1910, America constructed 73 to 78 of the most magnificent public buildings in its history. They weren't capitals, they weren't cathedrals, they were psychiatric hospitals. And during the exact same decades, a parallel system loaded 250,000 children onto trains and shipped them across the country to strangers. 72% of those children had at least one living parent. I keep coming back to that number, 72%. I wasn't looking for this. I was researching architectural history, specifically a style of building called the Kirkbride Plan, named after a Quaker physician from Morrisville, Pennsylvania. I'd seen photographs of these enormous abandoned hospitals scattered across the Northeast and wanted to understand what they were. Gothic towers, quarter-mile-long stone facades, underground tunnel systems connecting 40 buildings. The kind of structures you'd expect to find in the center of a European capital, except these were built on remote hilltops for people society had decided were mad. So I started with the buildings, the blueprints, the construction records, the architects. And the deeper I went, the more I noticed something else in the margins of those records. Children. Thousands of children appearing and disappearing from the same institutional systems, processed through the same city departments, drawn from the same neighborhoods during the same years. One system locked the parents away. Another system sent the children west. And both were run by the same people. Thomas Story Kirkbride was born in 1809 and received his surgeon's degree from the University of Pennsylvania in 1832. By 1840, he was the first superintendent of the Pennsylvania Hospital for the Insane. In 1844, he co-founded the Association of Medical Superintendents of American Institutions for the Insane, the organization that would eventually become the American Psychiatric Association. He served it for decades: secretary, treasurer, vice president, president. In 1854, he published a book that would reshape the American landscape on the construction, organization, and general arrangements of hospitals for the insane. 80 pages, 3 plates, a blueprint for an empire. The expanded second edition in 1880 ran to 341 pages and introduced what he called the improved linear plan. The design was unmistakable. A central administration building flanked symmetrically by staggered wings, one side for men, one for women, arranged so each successive ward set back from the one before it. From above, the building looked like a shallow V. The staggering wasn't decorative. It ensured every corridor received sunlight and cross-ventilation from both ends. Kirkbride specified ceiling heights of at least 12 feet in patient areas, 16 in administration. Corridors for the most disturbed patients had to be 10 feet wide, with rooms on only one side. Every ward had its own parlor, dining room, bathroom, speaking tube, and dumbwaiter. Each wing used case-hardened locks with unique keys, designed, in Kirkbride's words, so entirely different that it will be impossible by any slight alteration to make those for one side open the locks of the other. The maximum capacity was 200 patients, 250 absolute. That rule was formalized in 1851. Taunton State Hospital opened 3 years later with 330. The violations began almost immediately. The philosophy didn't. Kirkbride wrote something I haven't been able to forget. I know of no reason why an individual who has the misfortune to become insane should, on that account, be deprived of any comfort or even luxury. That wasn't a slogan, it was the treatment theory itself. moral treatment, the belief that beautiful, light-filled environments were curative. The grandeur wasn't excess, it was medicine, and the grandeur was staggering. Greystone Park in New Jersey, 673,000 square feet, the largest continuous foundation in the United States until the Pentagon was built in 1943. The Trans-Allegheny Lunatic Asylum in West Virginia, 1,295 feet long, 9 acres of floor space, 2.5 miles of hallways, walls 2.5 feet thick, the largest hand-cut stone masonry building in North America. Built initially by prison laborers and enslaved people, with blue sandstone quarried from Mount Clare and hauled by oxen. Skilled stonemasons recruited from Germany, Ireland, and Italy. Construction took 23 years. Buffalo's Asylum took 25. Hudson River took 31. These weren't buildings thrown up overnight. They were generation-long construction projects funded by state legislatures. Greystone at $2.5 million, Danvers at $1.5 million, Trans-Allegheny at $725,300 over budget. The architects were the finest of the era. Henry Hobson Richardson designed Buffalo, his largest career commission. Frederick Law Olmsted designed its grounds. The same talent pool that expanded the U.S. Capitol built these hospitals. And behind the construction campaign stood one woman. Dorothea Lind Dix escaped an abusive, alcoholic father at 12 and became a schoolteacher at 14. In 1841, she volunteered to teach Sunday school to female convicts at East Cambridge Jail in Massachusetts. She found mentally ill inmates confined in unheated rooms. That single visit launched a crusade that would reshape the country. Over the next 3 years, she visited more than 500 almshouses, 300 jails, and 18 penitentiaries across Massachusetts. In January 1843, she submitted her first memorial to the state legislature. It opened with words that shocked the Commonwealth. She told them she'd found insane persons in cages, closets, cellars, stalls, pens, chained, naked, beaten with rods, and lashed into obedience. Dix is credited with founding or helping to establish 32 institutions across the United States. She lobbied Congress for 12.25 million acres of federal land for the mentally ill. It passed both houses. President Franklin Pierce vetoed it in 1854. She went to Europe, met Pope Pius IX, and he personally inspected Roman asylums after reading her report. She spent her final years in a specially designed suite at the Trenton Hospital she had helped create. Her firstborn child opened May 15, 1848, the first purpose-built Kirkbride Hospital in America. By 1880, there were 139 asylums across the country, most shaped by Kirkbride's specifications. The institutional population was growing far faster than the general population. In 1881, 56,000 insane persons were treated in public and private institutions. By 1889, 97,500, a 74% increase in just 8 years, against roughly 25% general population growth. By 1910, the ratio of institutionalized insane to the general population had reached 1 in 490. By 1955, 558,000 people were locked inside public psychiatric hospitals. And who was being locked away? In 1902, Goodwin Brown, attorney for the New York State Commission of Lunacy, testified before the U.S. Senate Committee on Immigration. He told them that although only 25% of New York State's population was foreign-born, 50% of the inmates of state insane asylums were foreigners. He said this disproportion existed throughout the entire country. The diagnoses, if you can call them that, tell the rest of the story. The logbook of the West Virginia Hospital for the Insane documents admissions from 1864 to 1889. According to Snopes, which verified the records through the West Virginia Division of Culture and History. These entries recorded what the physicians themselves called supposed causes of illness, not clinical diagnoses, hypotheses, guesses. The list is real. Novel reading, laziness, egotism, greediness, suppressed masturbation, masturbation for 30 years, disappointed affection, religious enthusiasm, Salvation Army, politics, imaginary female trouble, time of life, gathering in the head, parents were cousins, marriage of son, bite of a rattlesnake, decoyed into the army, medicine to prevent conception, seduction and disappointment. The very first patient admitted was a housewife. Her supposed cause, domestic trouble. The legal standards matched the diagnostic ones. In Illinois, an 1851 statute allowed married women to be committed to insane asylums without the evidence of insanity required in other cases. No physician examination, no judicial hearing, no right to contest. A husband's request and a superintendent's agreement were enough. Elizabeth Packard learned this on June 18, 1860, when her husband Theophilus had her committed to the Illinois State Hospital for the insane. Her crime: she'd rejected Calvinist doctrines, expressed views aligned with Unitarianism, publicly contradicted her husband's theology in Bible class, and defended abolitionist John Brown. Two physicians, both members of Theophilus's church, briefly felt her pulse that morning. Without asking a single question, both pronounced her insane. She was confined for 3 years. When she was finally released, declared incurably insane, she discovered her husband had rented their home, sold her furniture, taken her money, and fled to Massachusetts with all 6 of their children. He then locked her in their nursery with nailed-shut windows. She dropped a letter from the window to a friend. A judge issued a habeas corpus writ. The jury found her sane after 7 minutes. Elizabeth Packard had resources. She had connections. She had a friend who happened to be walking past her window. She went on to found the Anti-Insane Asylum Society, publish multiple books, and successfully lobby for Illinois' 1867 law guaranteeing jury trials before commitment. But most women committed under that statute had none of those things. Most were poor. Most were immigrants. Most couldn't speak English. Nellie Bly, who went undercover at the Blackwell's Island Asylum in 1887, reported that many of the women inside were recent immigrants caught up in a law enforcement system in which they were unable to communicate. She wrote, "From the moment I entered the insane ward on the island, I made no attempt to keep up the assumed role of insanity. I talked and acted just as I do in ordinary life. Yet, strange to say, the more sanely I talked and acted, the crazier I was thought to be. And here's what I can't stop seeing. While this system was locking away immigrant mothers at disproportionate rates, while the buildings were going up, while the diagnoses were being scrawled into logbooks, another system was taking their children." Charles Loring Brace graduated from Yale in 1846. By 1852, he was serving as minister to the poor on Blackwell's Island, the same island that housed the asylum Nellie Bly would later infiltrate, and simultaneously working at the 5 Points mission in Lower Manhattan, ground zero for immigrant poverty in America. In February 1853, Brace founded the Children's Aid Society. In September 1854, the first large orphan train departed with 45 children, arriving in Dowagiac, Michigan, on October 1st. His 1872 book laid out the philosophy with remarkable directness. The class of a large city most dangerous to its property, its morals, and its political life are the ignorant, destitute, untrained, and abandoned youth. His solution, the best of all asylums for the outcast child, is the farmer's home. He called the program emigration. He said it accomplished more in relieving New York of youthful crime and misery than all other charities together. Approximately 200,000 children were sent west between 1854 and 1929. The Children's Aid Society alone relocated over 100,000. Children went to 45 states plus Canada and Mexico. The last train ran on May 31st, 1929, 3 boys sent to Sulphur Springs, Texas. At the train stops, prospective parents could inspect the children. People would inspect us like cattle farmers, one rider named Stanley Cornell recalled. Hazel Latimer remembered a farmer with old dirty hands examining her teeth. Her mother was alive, but hospitalized. My mother and I were very close because I was all she had, and she was all I had. On January 7th of 1918, my mother came to the school, and that was the last I saw of her. The critical number, according to a random sample of Children's Aid Society placement records, analyzed in an American University Law Review article, 72.6% of all children placed between 1854 and 1890 had at least one living parent. Approximately 25% had 2 living parents. Less than half were actual orphans. A separate study of the Protestant Orphan Asylum in St. Louis found that only 27% were full orphans. The same Law Review article characterizes the movement as the forced relocation of 200,000 children, primarily from vulnerable immigrant families. The timeline overlap isn't approximate, it's precise. Peak asylum construction ran from the 1850s through the 1880s, from 18 asylums in 1840 to 139 by 1880. Peak orphan train activity ran from 1855 to 1875, averaging 3,000 children per year. The decades of maximum overlap were the 1860s through the 1890s. Both systems drew from the same population, poor immigrants, in the Northeast Corridor. Both were administered by overlapping bureaucracies. In New York City, a single department, the Department of Public Charities and Correction from 1860 to 1895, oversaw asylums, almshouses, workhouses, and the institutional conditions producing homeless children. And Brace himself was the connecting figure. He was ministering to the poor on Blackwell's Island and the asylum and almshouse complex at the very moment he conceived the orphan train system. The NYC Municipal Archives Almshouse Ledger Collection documents that many women brought their children with them to Blackwell's Island institutions or had their babies in the institution. Sometimes I pause and ask myself if I'm reading too much into the overlap. Reform movements cluster. The same era produced public schools, public hospitals, public parks. Maybe the asylum boom and the orphan trains were parallel responses to the same crisis: immigration, urbanization, poverty, running side by side without intersection. Maybe the timing is just timing. But then I look at the records, the same department, the same island, the same neighborhoods, a system that committed immigrant mothers at twice their share of the population, using diagnoses like domestic trouble and imaginary female trouble and disappointed affection, and a parallel system that took 250,000 children, 72% of whom had living parents, and sent them to strangers in 45 states. Children as young as 5 arrested by police and forcibly classified as orphans. Andrew Burke spent time at the nurseries on Randall's Island, overseen by the same Department of Public Charities and Correction, before being sent west on an orphan train in 1859. He later became the second governor of North Dakota. No single documented case directly links a named individual's asylum commitment to their children being placed on an orphan train. The records aren't there, and that brings me to the part I keep returning to. The 1890 census enumerated 62,979,766 Americans. It was the first census to use Herman Hollerith's electromechanical tabulating machines, punch cards that reduced initial processing from 8 years to 6 weeks. 2 fires, 25 years apart, destroyed it. The first, on March 22, 1896, struck a Department of Interior storage building and destroyed special schedules, including those pertaining to the insane, feeble-minded, deaf and dumb and blind. as well as mortality, crime, pauperism, and benevolence. The general population schedules survived. The second fire hit the U.S. Department of Commerce building at approximately 5 o'clock on the afternoon of January 10th, 1921. Census Director Samuel L. Rogers reported the next morning that the 1890 census was about 25% destroyed, with 50% of the remainder damaged by water, smoke, and fire. The cause was never determined. The damaged record sat deteriorating for over a decade. In December 1932, the chief clerk of the Bureau of the Census sent the Librarian of Congress a list of papers for destruction, including Schedules, Population, 1890, Original. Congress authorized destruction on February 21st, 1933, one day before President Hoover laid the cornerstone for the new National Archives building. The remaining schedules were destroyed in 1934. Of 62,979,766 people counted, approximately 6,160 entries survive. Fragments from 10 states and the District of Columbia, roughly 1/100th of 1%. The 1890 census was also the first for which the government didn't require copies in local offices. The federal copies were the only copies. What was lost in those fires wasn't just names. It was the one data set that might have connected the institutional populations, asylum inmates, almshouse residents, orphanage children, workhouse prisoners, to each other and to their families. The special schedules, destroyed in 1896, would have captured detailed information about who was in those asylums, who was in those orphanages, and whether a line could be drawn between a mother committed in one ledger and a child removed in another. That line cannot be drawn now. The records are gone. A 20-year gap yawns between the 1880 and 1900 censuses, spanning the exact decades of maximum institutional activity, the peak years of both the asylum boom and the orphan trains. Each step has an explanation. The 1896 fire was accidental. The 1921 fire's cause was undetermined. The 1933 authorization followed standard, if negligent, federal procedures. The clerk sent a list. The librarian was asked to identify records worth preserving. Congress gave approval. The records were pulped, each step plausible on its own. Together, they destroyed the only comprehensive record of who was institutionalized in America during the decades when the system was at its largest. Here's the compressed timeline. In 1841, Dorothea Dix walks into a jail and finds mentally ill inmates in unheated cells. By 1848, the first Kirkbride Asylum opens. In 1851, Illinois passed a law letting husbands commit wives without evidence. In 1853, Charles Loring Brace founds the Children's Aid Society while ministering on Blackwell's Island. In 1854, the first orphan train departs. Through the 1860s, 70s, and 80s, asylums multiply from 18 to 139, while 3,000 children per year are sent west. In 1887, Nellie Bly finds an asylum stuffed with immigrant women who can't speak English. In 1890, the census counts 63 million Americans. In 1896, the fire destroys the special schedules, the asylum and orphanage records. In 1902, Senate testimony confirms that immigrants fill 50% of asylum beds despite being 25% of the population. In 1921, the second fire guts the remaining population schedules. In 1929, the last orphan train runs. In 1933, Congress authorizes destruction of the surviving fragments. The buildings that housed this system were the grandest public architecture in America. Most have been demolished, abandoned, or converted beyond recognition within the last 20 years. Greystone, the largest foundation in the country for 67 years, was torn down in 2015 at a taxpayer cost of up to $50 million, despite 7 reuse proposals, including no-cost to state offers. The National Trust for Historic Preservation called it one of the top 5 architectural losses of that year. When Willard Asylum in New York finally closed in 1995, an employee discovered over 400 suitcases in a locked attic. They belonged to patients who had died at the facility between the 1910s and 1960s. Clothing, photographs, letters, diaries, musical instruments. Nearly 5,800 people are buried in Willard's cemetery, with numbered markers instead of names. An estimated 55,000 patients lie in anonymous graves across New York State alone. Why did immigrants fill half the asylum beds while comprising a quarter of the population? Why could a diagnosis of novel reading or domestic trouble strip a woman of her freedom and her children? Why was the one man who connected the asylum system to the orphan train system, Charles Loring Brace, minister on Blackwell's Island, founder of the Children's Aid Society, never asked, in any surviving record, what happened to the children of the women institutionalized on that same island? Why did the special schedules, the asylum records, the orphanage records, the pauperism records, burn first in 1896, 25 years before the general population records? Why was the 1890 census the first and only census with no local copies? And why were the damaged remains authorized for destruction one day before the cornerstone was laid for a building designed to make sure federal records would never be lost again? I don't have answers, only patterns, only the fact that one system removed the parents and another system removed the children during the same decades from the same neighborhoods, administered by the same department, on the same island in the East River. The suitcases at Willard sat in that attic for decades. No one opened them. No one matched them to the names, the numbered graves, the logbook entries, the supposed causes scrawled by physicians who felt, by their own admission, a little unease with what they were writing. The buildings are mostly gone now, but the records that survive, the ones that weren't lost to fire or water or a clerk's list or a congressional vote, still sit in archives across the Northeast, municipal ledgers, almshouse intake books, placement records, ships, manifests. They're waiting for someone to draw the line between one ledger and another.